Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, this is Nerds the Human, and welcome to this, my basic modding guide to Rome Total War. If you've been around the channel for a little while, you will know that I have covered a vast array of modding opportunities in the game, and this video really is here to pull all of that together and show you how you can access all the most useful and interesting files. Of course, I will be linking to my full guides throughout the video where it's relevant, and look out in the comments for the timestamps if you're looking for something in particular. Most of my videos are of course aimed at the original game, but with the remaster recently released, it does make sense to try and cover that as much as possible. Luckily the files are very similar indeed, so where possible I'll try and explain where things are different, but do bear in mind that the remaster might have some kinks that haven't yet been worked out. Whether you want to change Rome Total War, Barbarian Invasion, Alexander, or indeed the remastered versions, all the files are essentially the same. There's a few small tweaks here or there which I'll explain if they become relevant, but the main thing is we want to look inside this folder here, data. Now that is in a slightly different file path according to the different games. So to start off with, we'll just have a quick check of where those are. So for Rome Total War, it's simply here, data. Barbarian Invasion, you need to head inside the BI folder and into data. If you want to go to Alexander, that's a separate game here, so click on that. This is the original game file, so you want to head inside Alexander, then into the data folder. Whereas if you want to go into remaster, again, back into your Steam apps, your Steam library, assuming that's where you've got the game, and from there you need to go to Rome Remastered. Inside here, the file path is a bit different. It's contents, resources, and then data. Now from there are three different folders of course. We've got Alexander, which takes you to the data folder. We've got Barbarian Invasion, which takes you to its data folder. And then we have data itself, which is the main Rome Total War folder. The data folder is of course the hub of pretty much all the information we might want to look up or indeed edit. But what we're going to do is start off with the key file here, deska_strat. It's probably the main file if you've done any modding that you'll recognize. Now, they are in slightly different file paths, and whilst most things here are in the same place, this one will slightly vary. So I'm going to have this split into 6 screens, so you can see there's 6 different versions that you might well need to follow. But of course, I'll be commentating over Rome Total War Gold, the original Rome Total War. So we head inside the World folder, into Maps, into Campaign, Imperial Campaign, and then deska_strat. If, like me, you spent most of the mid-noughties modding and playing Rome Total War, then you'll almost certainly recognise this file here, and specifically, you'll recognise the little playable section for the campaign. Very simply, you move the non-playable factions up here, and now you can play as them. It's really as simple as that. Now in Alexander, the slaves aren't actually on the list at all. They're not even on the non-playable section, but they are playable. You just need to add their name in at the top, like we have done here. The only difference is you're not going to cut and paste it, you're just going to type it. And on the remaster, I tend to find it's a bit fiddly. Sometimes I do find I just need to leave someone in non-playable. If you're having problems, that's the best thing to do. But obviously with my Rebels campaign for remaster, you can see that they can be made playable. Now underneath, we have the start and end date. Fairly obvious, to be honest. You can change it around as you wish, as well as the spawning value for both the Rebel armies and the Rebel pirate ships. As we move further down the file, we'll find the landmarks and resources section, and this is probably a pertinent time to point out that the deska_strat file is the one that the game finds when you start a new game. Any changes you make here will influence the way a new game is set up, but it won't change your previous save files. The rest of the files we'll look at in the rest of this video will dynamically change within any old save files. But this is for the initial setup of the game. So we have the landmarks here, things like the Pyramid and Sphinx. You can see their coordinates. We can move that around if we want. Likewise with things like iron and wine here. We can change the coordinates. Indeed, we can add in a new line if that's what we want to do. You can see here on this little clip of Medieval 2 when I did a bit of a guide for the resources. Works for Rome and Medieval 2, by the way. You can see we've absolutely flurried the south of Naples here with huge piles of resources. It's a bit ludicrous, but it's an example. It shows you how simple it is to change. Then of course we come to the faction section, so we'll have a look at the Roman Julii here, who are given this little description of comfortable Caesar. I'm just going to refer you back actually to the main files for a moment, because in the Remastered there's a very interesting file which explains some of these descriptions. So inside the Rome Total War's data folder is the Feral Desca AI personality. When we scroll down this file, we'll be able to see the Julii description of Comfortable Caesar here, which tells you its building priorities as comfortable, military priority as Caesar, and diplomatic priority as default. Now, if we scroll further up the file, we'll find an example of what that actually means. So for the building priority comfortable, it tells you how much they prefer certain actions. Obviously, the AI needs to make decisions to do with how much it wants a population bonus, how much wall defenses it wants, how often it's going to stage games. And the different personalities here explain how often the AI are likely to go for one option over another. Now, I don't remember this file being so visible in the original Rome Total War, so it's interesting in the Remastered that this is here. So if you are a bit of an anorak, see me for example, then you might well want to have a little look through here. But I have seen a few comments before asking, what are all these odd lines about the characters? Religious Stalin, it's a balanced Caesar. Yeah, you can get your answers here. It does actually explain it in quite nice detail. Underneath we have the starting denarii of 5,000, followed by a list of all of their settlements. It tells you which region, the Etruria region, 4,000 population, and then a list of the current buildings. Now when we look in the buildings file later, you'll be able to see which building names you'll need to use for it. But if you take the examples from here, it should start to be fairly obvious. Just keep any formatting very clear. I tend, if I change around the buildings in here, to find what I want elsewhere in the file, just to try and make sure I get the formatting correct. So they have their two towns here. They have Etruria and they have the Umbria region. And you can see all the buildings inside. Underneath we find all of the armies. Now, of course, we can change around those cities at the start, but we can also change around all of this stuff. We can add in different units if we want them to have some extra triarii. Well, let's just take the triarii here and change it around. There we go, an extra unit of triarii. Maybe I want to have a huge stack of forces at the start. Well, I can just add a huge pile on. Can change the experience here up to 9. Why not? Let's give him armor 3 and weapons 2, because I feel like that. Later on, we're going to look at the traits and the retinue files. And indeed, you can see the names in there to add them in onto the list here. You can give them all sorts of traits, all sorts of ancillaries. And further down, you will start to get some of the other characters, people like the spies, diplomats. Again, change around the traits, change around their locations as and how you like. Now, at the very bottom, you get the family tree, and this bit can get a bit complicated. I will take a much deeper look at the family trees in a separate video, but for now, let's have a good look at some of the main pitfalls with this example. So this is my Desca Strat file from my King Arthur playthrough, and for that I created my own family tree, and I did have a number of problems when I set this up. It can be just a little bit fiddly, but the main comment that I've seen from people having issues with this is that the ages seems to be causing them problems. Now the main issue you're probably finding with the ages is that they all need to match up. So for example, King Arthur over here, or Prince Arthur as he is at this point here, has a son called Mordred. And we can see Mordred is listed up here. He is 11 years old. So Arthur, I can't just make Arthur 20. He can't be 20 and have an 11-year-old son according to the game. So we just need to make sure that our ages match up. But as I say, we'll go into this in more detail in a separate video. Before we leave the Imperial Campaign folder then, we want to look at just a couple other files in here. There's Desca_mercenaries, which is great for moving around where the mercenaries can appear. You can have elephants in Germania, Christian archers in Britannia. Indeed, you can make them appear every turn if you want. You can make them appear with 7 experience, whatever you like. There's a video on that if you want to change around more of that. There's also the win conditions here. You can change those around. Fairly simple inside that file. Back inside Rome Total War's data folder then, and we're going to scroll all the way down towards the bottom. Now this is one of the most important and most fun files to change, export_Desca_unit. Now I should point out though, on the remastered version of this, so I'm just going to hop into the same position in the remastered folder. In remastered there are 2 versions of the file, so we scroll all the way down, you'll see what I mean. There's export_Desca_unit, but there's also the feral version of the files. So if you're playing on the remastered game balance, then you'll need to edit this file here. Whereas if you use the original balance of the game, then it's this file here you'll need to edit instead. This file is absolutely fantastic, and not just because it's so easy to change, but because those changes are so discernible in the gameplay. Let's take an example here of the Roman Triarii, who of course are infantry spearmen, but you might think that a lot of this information looks like a bit of gobbledygook. Indeed, it might seem that way, but it's actually very well explained at the top of the file. For example, I know that under stat cost over here, we have how long it takes to recruit the unit, how much it costs to recruit it, and the upkeep here. Now, if I scroll up to the top, it is very well explained, as I said. So whatever you want to find out, if you want to know what all these rows of numbers are, you can simply read along the list here. Indeed, if we go over here to stat cost, it says number of turns to build 1, cost of unit to construct, that's the 500, and the cost of upkeep 210. Indeed, it's very simple to make the changes you want on here, and if you're a bit eagle-eyed, you might have noticed that we have the primary attack value of 20 here, yet obviously I've just changed that around. Indeed, I think we did a video where we looked at super-powered peasants with well over 50 attack, 0 upkeep. It was a little bit ludicrous, but whether you want to just muck around or if you want to make a few little balance changes here or there, it's very simple to do. So let's just go whack up the primary attack stat here. We can change around the morale over here. It's 10 at the moment. You can whack that up to 12 if you want it to be that little bit higher. There's the discipline, the level of training as well. All sorts of things that we can change. In fact, we've actually looked at this file a number of times in my guide videos here on the channel because it's so simple to make those small changes. For example, the Triarii here can have themselves a phalanx simply by adding the word phalanx into this list here. In fact, we had the peasants with phalanxes, which was a little bit ludicrous, but fun all the same. Indeed, we did it with Testudos as well. We actually had no shield Testudos, which it led to some interesting investigations on exactly how the mechanics of the formations worked. But there are other things we can change as well. We've got the attributes up here. You can see for the Triarii, it's fairly basic: seafaring, hide in forest, and the unit can sap. But if you look at the top here, there's a list of other things that you might find interesting to add on as well. If you played the randomizer mod, which I would thoroughly recommend by the way, you might well have noticed a load of your units end up with can run amok, or with the command where they carry a legionary eagle. All of these things are very simple to add on, and obviously when it's randomized, suddenly you get a lot of units with all of this madness added in. Probably the most fun part of the entire file is this section here, the weapon attributes. Now there are some basic things like armor piercing or the length of the pikes, for example, but the best one is this one here, the body piercing. This can be hilarious fun. This is the same thing that ballistas use, by the way, for their missiles to travel through several men. Give this to a unit of archers, and it is like machine gunning down, particularly with Testudos. It is spectacular in its masochism. Once you're done adding on random attributes, formations, increasing the morale, the discipline, or the training, you might well think that you're done with this, but no, we can even add the units to different factions if that was what we want to do. Inside my King Arthur campaign, I gave myself some lovely Eastern cataphracts. Now, if we head down to these chappies, yes, we can simply add on the Britons, and voila, there we can start using them as the Britons as well. Now, there are a few other little changes you might have to make with that. I have a full guide if you want to do this for yourself, but certainly adds an awful lot of potential roleplay. And you know, there are certain factions such as Carthage without archers where you might just want to add a little unit on. So this file here, absolutely fantastic, small little tweaks, but also some big changes if you want to muck around with the ownership as well. The next file we're going to look at is just above Export Desca Unit, and it's this one up here, Export Desca Buildings. As you might imagine, this is all to do with the buildings you can construct. Once within the file then, you'll see all the buildings listed here with various bits of information underneath. But let's find ourselves an example. Let's go down to the sewers here. Now, the sewers, of course, are the health building chains, and they go from the sewers to the baths, to the aqueducts, to the city plumbing. But if we like, we can edit this around. Obviously, the barbarians don't currently have this available to them. But very simply, if you want to go and move the barbarians into this, well, let's just go and grab barbarians from up here, scroll back down, add them in. And with that, voila, once again, barbarians now can build themselves the sewers. Now, if you want to continue this, you can do it for the next level up, the baths down here. Indeed, there are lots of things that we can change along this as well. There are the prerequisites, such as the market trader here. We can get rid of that if we so wish. There's the health bonus. We can make that bigger if we want. We can add new bonuses on. If you wanted to add happiness, then we can do that as well. Indeed, construction time and the cost are also here. It's really simple to change. Indeed, this is something I played around with on my King Arthur Britain campaign. I gave myself sewers. In fact, I think I gave us the baths, gave us stone walls for the barbarians as well. Simple to do, and you can add all sorts of bonuses on. And I'm also pretty sure in my guide video for this, we got the world's most ludicrous port, where I added on pretty much every bonus we could possibly think of. It's all well and good changing around which factions can build buildings and changing the capabilities of them. But what we can also do here is change the recruitment. Now, of course, if you do want to make certain units available to other factions, like the cataphracts before, we're going to have to edit in this file as well to make sure they're recruitable. Indeed, that's all covered in the guide. But there are some other little details here as well. Here are the Roman Terrarii, back to our good old friends. And obviously, they're not available after the Marian Reforms. Well, get rid of that line, and they're available both before and after their reforms. It's as simple as that. Perhaps you want Parthia to have yourselves some lovely Triarii. Give them some good spearmen. Well, simple enough to do. Add them in here, change the ownership on the previous file we looked at, and there you go. They can recruit them as well. Now, there are a couple little folders in the UI that we'll look at later that you need to change for that as well. Again, all in the guide. But it's very easy. There are only just a few small tweaks that you need to make. One final quick change you might want to consider here is simply copying this line here, Roman Triarii, which currently is listed under the army barracks building. Well, if you want, we can make that appear under, well, the ports, as we saw earlier, but also this is just simply the governor's house here. Paste it in, and now Roman Triarii are able to be built in the governor's house. Should also get your formatting right, by the way. That Parthia line was slightly wrong. My file will definitely break if I left that as it was. Just always be careful, particularly in this file with some of the formatting, particularly the bits and brackets can be a little bit awkward. But nonetheless, the changes are very, very minimal for big, big effects. There's one more file in the data folder we want to take a good look at, and that's a little bit further up. It's Desca SM Factions. Now this one is intriguing because there's lots of random little bits of information we can play around with. This file is pretty simple to read. You have yourself a faction at the top, followed by their culture, and then an array of different bits of information for the game. Now you have the primary and secondary colour here, of course Julii red and black. These are very easily changeable. It's very much just the RGB 255 colour system, so that one's very simple to change around. Now, some of the other stuff that you might find interesting here, custom battle availability, that's interesting for the rebels, you can make them playable, but more importantly, there's this little line here, prefers naval invasions. Now, I kind of feel like part of the reason Medieval 2 you have all those mad factions like Milan and Portugal is because on Medieval 2, a lot more factions have yes on this little line here, so that might be something else you want to play with. That's the last of the files that I'm going to look at in terms of editing, but there are a few interesting ones for the lookup. If we head a bit further down, you can find this one here, Export Desca Ancillaries. As you might imagine, this lists all of the different retinue that you can get with your generals, and indeed how to get them. We can actually edit that as well. We'll have a quick peek into there in a moment. There's also a very similar one here, Export Desca Character Traits. As you can imagine, that's for the traits section. They're very similar files in the way they work. Let's just have a quick pop into here. This file is essentially broken up into two sections. The top half is basically the traits themselves, what they're called, if they have an anti-trait, i.e. something they can't hold at the same time, which characters can get it. For example, Good Commander goes to the family. We have the name that is given inside the game itself, Confident Commander is the trait, and the effect, Command +1. Now the bottom half of the file looks at the triggers, how you can get them. But whilst I usually use this as a lookup file, maybe if I want to gain a certain trait, I'll figure out how I can get it. The other thing you can do, of course, is actually edit it, add in some extra details as well. If you want, you can just shuffle down here. Yes, a good attacker gives you an effect of attack 2. If I want, I can just go and add that up here, add that on. Why not? Now it gives one command and attack 2. Like the other files, very simple to change around. The bottom half is all to do with the triggers, i.e. how you get those traits. Now it's not listed by trait, it's listed by actions. So for example, we have here, if you're an attacker in a crushing victory, Well, there's a certain amount of chance you're going to pick up Good Attacker. Well, Good Attacker 2 at a chance of 100 here, and Tactical Skill 1 at a chance of 5. Essentially, these are percentages here. Now, if you want to know what Tactical Skill is exactly, well, let's just search up the files. It's it's the opposite of Ignorance. You can't get it with Ignorance, but yeah, Ambush 2, Line of Sight 1. Very nice indeed. So that might be something that you want to make more likely. Well, change it up. Let's make it 85% now. And with that, you can make very simple changes in here. Indeed, you can just use it to reference, but there's all sorts of information. Now, if you want to be a real anorak, you can just go through here and study all of it. But certainly, it's a good little place if you want to reference, or indeed, if you want to go and give yourselves a bit of a boost of getting some of those fun and rarer traits. Obviously, this folder is full of all sorts of files, masses of information that you might want to scroll your eyes over. But what I will do is just refer you to one of the other really useful files, one that I use quite a lot. So obviously in Deska Strat earlier, we commented on how you can change around the names of your generals. But of course, they do need to match a name for the faction. So this one here is good for a simple reference, not for changing the whole list of names of the factions. That's in a different place. But this one is just very useful to refer to what names are available to your faction. If you want to make changes to the list of faction names itself, well, you need to head inside the text subfolder of data. From here, there's a little file here called names.txt. Whether you want to simply make the slabs slightly more historically accurate, or you want a full-on roleplay campaign like my King Arthur, where I needed Bedivere, Morgana, and of course Arthur himself to be on the list of names, well, this is the file here that you need to change. Luckily, I do have a little guide video again, a little link up here at the top if you want to change that. A bit further down this folder is the Imperial Campaign regions and settlement names. Very simply, if you want to change the names of regions and settlements in the game, this is the place to go. Again, I've got a little video popping up at the top of the screen right now if you want to know that in more detail. And there's also the campaign descriptions. Campaign descriptions, as you might imagine, is simply on the Imperial campaign screen. Before you begin, there's the flavor text explaining what the faction's background is. Some of the factions don't have a description, so if you want, you can add those in for yourself, or indeed edit the ones that are usually there. Again, a little link at the top there. Finally, down the bottom, you have export buildings and export underscore units. These also describe the buildings and the units themselves. So this basically fills in the unit cards or the building info cards. So again, any changes you might want to make, they are the places to head. Back inside the data folder then, and we're going to head inside this subfolder, the UI folder. Now I'm not going to go into detail here. Essentially, this is the user interface, and it has all of the little unit cards that you might want to see during the game. Now, if you add in a new unit to a faction or you add a new building, you obviously want to edit these in. If you follow those full guides, then I explain all of this inside here. But for your reference, that is simply where all that information is held. Instead, what we really want to look at in a little bit more detail is back inside World, and we're going to go into Maps, and this time into Base folder. Now, this one's particularly interesting because it has the maps that you can edit for the campaign itself. So Map Features is a very interesting file indeed, and one that I used particularly in my Alexander campaign. The other file you might want to take a look at in here is the Map Ground Types, which very much works in tandem with Map Features. The difference is this one is much more to do with the terrain itself, whether it's forest, desert, sea, that kind of thing. But before you make changes to either of these two files, you will need to delete this little file here. It just means that once this is gone, the changes you make will generate a new one of these files, which basically tells the game what the map looks like. The other thing to note though is that these are TGA files. For me, this opens up in Photoshop. I'm using 2019 version. So whilst the rest of these are pretty much all being Notepad documents today, these two are slightly different, but hopefully with Photoshop, it's still fairly accessible. The final place I want to show you then is back inside the main file itself, Rome Total War, and it's this folder here, the Preferences. Now, this is pretty much the same for Alexander, Barbarian Invasion. You just head into Preferences, but it doesn't seem to exist in the remaster. If you know where the preference file is, or the equivalent to it, I'm assuming it comes under a different name, but I have not come across it at this point in time. So this is really much more relevant to the original games. But once we open up this file, there are a few things you might want to tweak. Essentially, this folder just logs what information you have changed inside the game options. However, there are a few little things you might want to bear in mind here. You've got things like the subtitles. I've got those on, for example. You might well want to leave the Fog of War on if that's something you want. You don't necessarily have to use the toggle Fog of War cheat to do that. You can just set that in the file here. Of course, there are things like the volume. This obviously is just dynamically changed. The unit size, that's just something I clicked on in the options. But down the bottom, there is this very interesting one here. Edit settlement names. True. I've changed this to true, which basically means I can edit the names of the cities as I go along, just like you can on Medieval 2. Have a little look around on here. There might be some interesting things, some things that aren't actually in the game options within the game itself, but they will be listed here. I have noticed myself that the remastered files tend to be a little bit more fiddly when it comes to tweaking them. So I've got an alternative solution for you here that might just help. Bit of a classic. So if we go and copy the file here, I'm going to go and just dump this. You can dump it on your desktop, backup files, wherever you want to put it. I'm going to put it there for the time being. I'm going to go back into Rome Total War Remastered, and I'm going to go delete the original. Now, obviously, by doing that, I can then go to my backup file, make the changes I want. Then when I save it again, I'm going to save it back into Rome Total War Remastered, into the data folder where it belongs, and hopefully that time the changes you make will have stuck. If still you're having problems, then one final thing to consider might be playing around with the read-only elements of the files. So if we go and right-click on data here and properties, you'll probably find that it is listed here as read-only. There are quite likely some files in here which are that, and so it might be a good idea to simply get rid of it. Now that might well take a little time just to process all of that. Indeed, you can see there the bar slowly ticking up, but hopefully once it's done this, you might have a bit more ability to edit the files. Thank you for joining me on this basic modding guide to Rome Total War. Suffice to say, this video did turn out a little bit longer than I originally planned, but I think in doing so, it has managed to cover all of the basics for any beginners, and indeed for those of you who've been around here for a while, it might just point out some things that you may not have picked up on so far. Either way, I hope that you enjoy them thoroughly. There will be some more guides coming up in the near future. I also look at Medieval 2 a lot as well. But for now, I will leave you. I'm Thomas, this is Tenez the Human, and this has been a basic modding guide for Rome Total War. Thank you, and goodbye.
Go, my puppies, go! Hunt down the German dogs. My chariots are complete lunatics! Stop charging into the spears! Stop charging into the spears! Why do these guys not break? Everyone else has fled! Go home! Go home! What is happening at the chariots?